Yeah, Pixar's Elio is just pretty forgettable. Have you been anticipating to see this movie? I don't really know anyone that was. I was in a weird backwards kind of way, because clearly this movie has been through a little bit of development hell, and it shows. We've had several different trailers over the years, and not only was there a delay popping up along the way, but also the whole story got rewritten as shown by the trailers changing the story. It's clear that there was something in that Pixar magic that was missing in that initial pitch, and this next pitch we've gotten is equally as samey, standard, and honestly, just feels like a generic modern Pixar movie, if that makes sense. Kinda hard to define, but it just does everything alright. And whilst I would typically be wanting to say that's a great standard to hold and Pixar's gonna have these great emotional scenes, no, there isn't really strong emotional scenes. There are emotional scenes, but they ain't strong. And the plot line is pretty much exactly what you see in the trailer. What you see is in fact what you get mostly, and especially when you compare it to the other filmography of Pixar Studios, this just, yeah, it perfectly falls to the wayside for just not hitting many marks. That being said, I went into this movie with a really interesting, curious eye on it, right? And as the movie quickly got into things, I found that I wasn't fully realizing how this story was meant to go. And maybe that does come from the fact that multiple trailers came out with different plot lines before they rebranded it all. And that's actually one of the reasons why some of my friends didn't choose to see this movie on day one, because they didn't know what they were to expect. The marketing confused them, let alone didn't entice them. But even for me, I guess I got a little bit confused along the way, because one of the first major things we learn about the story of Elio is one that kind of went over my head. I remember thinking it briefly. I think it was mentioned in the synopsis of the second version of the story, but never in verbiage from the trailers. You know the motherly character in the Elio footage? It's not his mother. It is, in fact, his auntie, because his parents both died in some accident, and Elio is a grieving child of orphanage. That's not right. And Elio is a grieving orphan. This is the relationship mirror to, ironically, Disney's Lilo and Stitch. It's Lilo and Nani, done by Pixar, weirdly at the same time as the remake came out. That already massively changes the dynamic of the relationship in my head, and I didn't come to expect it. Did you know that? You would have had to have read the description of one of the latter trailers and forgotten or ignored the part where he says, "Goodbye, Mum," on a phone call in the original trailer, because that scene is deleted. It's from the old story. So they changed what the relationship was and then didn't clarify that in the rebrand. Already off to an interesting start, and I sort of came into this thinking, oh, maybe they've done a bit of an elemental. Maybe this is all the marketing department's fault, and there's gonna be changes that make it the better movie than what it seemed like it was going to be. There are some changes, some notable ones. They've doctored some of the shots to be different and almost worse in every scenario. But before we even get there, I'm going to try not to be too spoilery early on. We'll get to the spoilers as we go, but we will go a little bit into the chronology of the plotline. With this being a space movie, the very first shot of the film is Earth, and then it zooms out, and you know, you get that like nice cosmic tone for what this movie is. And I gotta tell you, in being that like generic, forgettable Pixar movie, it has that nice Pixar orchestral like high-pitched note, but it's not WALL-E's opening. You know what I mean? It's funny, with Pixar making so many movies over the years, there's gonna be some overlaps in genres, and when you look at the directorial choices behind how WALL-E begins, with the likes of an old school song playing out of a tiny television screen in a post-apocalyptic Earth, that is so much more enticing in just the visuals and the soundscapes, as opposed to just a high-pitched, dramatic, orchestral note that then just kind of shows the Earth, moves, and then we're at a military base. There's something notably missing for the core magic of Pixar, and I felt it immediately. There's going to be a few other movies that this unfortunately crosses over with. We've already mentioned Lilo and Stitch and WALL-E. There's a long list of comparisons. And against all of these comparisons, this movie just doesn't have its own footing. And in fact, actually, as I'm going to go through this movie chronologically, it's going to very quickly be completed, because I don't actually have a lot of notes for this movie this time around. As opposed to, say, our review on Lilo and Stitch, the remake, I'm sure that's plenty long. Was that like 40 minutes or something? Just rambling about all the changes and problems it has? This movie, with the problems it does have, still doesn't have me just monologuing every single issue, because it's like it's just fine and like, the whole way through. So as this prologue opening begins, Elio is recently grieving over the loss of his parents, very much being a shell of himself, where he then discovers a planetary explanation of the Voyager mission, going out to send a message to aliens, which is a cool premise to play around. A little bit realistic, which is nice, as opposed to Wall-E's post-environmentalism stuff, I guess. And genuinely, as someone who understands some of the history on that, like the Golden Record and all that, that was really interesting to see, and sets off the premise of Elio wanting to be abducted, and the aliens discovering Earth. Nice! We'll then get a montage of Elio wanting to be abducted. It's very much what you've seen in the trailers, staring up at the sky with a little colander on his head. And then with his antics, he starts taking things further, sending out a message to aliens, not by a phone call that's meant to go to his not mum, but just because the aliens have managed to receive a response and there's an opportunity to talk into it. And there's a little bit of fun there. They introduce a new, like, conspiracy theorist kind of scientist guy. Kind of a cliche, now that I think about it, actually. It's a very generic character, but the delivery of his lines is absolutely fantastic, and the animation, brilliant, as always. With it being a Pixar movie, it has some nice camera effects. They do a lot of reality lens stuff, like changing the focal length and all this. There's a couple of shots as well that are in slow motion, like it's filmed as if it was at 1 frame rate, and then they slowed it down to look realistic. It's a directorial choice. It's not the greatest in the world, but it's nice to see something. And some of the presentation's really, really nice, like how the aliens communicate via the screens. You've seen it in the trailers. It's nice, funky effects of text that sort of pops out of the screen as well and makes them face. Visuals, nice. Elio is then sent to a military boarding school where we do see he is actually actively bullied by a couple because he fobbed them off over a radio club that he invented. Kind of cringe, I guess that makes sense. But then we get to the real meat and potatoes of the plot line, Elio getting abducted, and already here, this is probably like the scene that is the most prevalent in all of the trailers, right? It's Elio staring up at the lights, getting taken. Sometimes he's pessimistic about it, sometimes he's optimistic, depending on what version of the story you're running with. There is a massive element of this scene that I think is genuinely, like, again, made me think, oh my god, they've just messed up the marketing. There's something really, really golden to be had here, and we just don't see it in the trailers. And maybe they didn't want to spoil something. But I don't think it's worth a spoiler. It's way more interesting on the sci-fi front, if you ask me. And that is the fact that the bullies of this boarding school are in this scene. They are seen in the silhouettes alongside Elio, but the reason they're there is not because they notice the aliens and respond, it's because they themselves are frozen in time. I guess you can kind of see it in the fact that there's a big watery wave that's frozen. It's not part of the ship. It is the ship freezing time to abduct Elio out from his little pocket, and the bullies are literally frozen, holding Elio in place for him to then slip out of, and they're there in that moment where Elio's able to take a step away. That's brilliant. I loved that, and if that was in the trailer, I'd be like, ooh, there's a little bit more of that sci-fi element. Let's, see something. Instead, what they decided to show in the marketing is just generic boy gets abducted in generic alien abduction. Now, unfortunately, that time freeze thing doesn't really come back in a substantial way. It's just a nice directorial choice and one I really, really am on board with, but it feels like just another symptom of a very generic standard movie that in trying to, I guess, be so on the line, doesn't stand out either. Now, it's from here we get the same typical montage you would expect to see from the trailers. Most of the story is what you get from the trailers. It's not hiding a big secret. We'll get more to that as we go on. There's a communiverse, as it's called, a bunch of aliens getting together, sharing their knowledge and generally being peaceful. And it's interesting the direction they choose to take with it that makes a lot of sense, keeps it simplified and allows for plotline 1, I guess, and that is that strange evil guy that's now evil and not a sidekick on the side is a threat to the communiverse. He is gunning for membership, as is Elio now. There's apparently they're looking for candidates, and there's 2 rivaling each other, I guess, in their sister. I don't know, whatever, don't worry about it. Anyway, because he is rejected, because he wants to dominate the universe and combine knowledge to be a powerful warmongerer, he is banished, and then he decides to attack the communiverse instead. And every alien species doesn't want to handle it because they don't know how to do conflict negotiations. They just avoid and leave from any warmongering alien species. Interesting. Alright, covers a lot of the world building, I guess, in the background, because you would wonder, surely that's a trait they would have to deal with. They just don't, and the humans have to do it for the first time. Okay, cool. Elio then signs himself up as doing it as their leader in order to find a place and be accepted and not be taken back to Earth with this failed membership thing, where they were about to run away to the edge of the universe. Okay. That's the plot. You've seen it from the trailers. Where do they go from here? Well, there is another element of the marketing for Elio that's in preview scenes, but not in the trailers. Again, I don't know why they were hiding from the sci-fi elements from this sci-fi space movie, but we then get introduced to the concept of cloning gel of some sort, whereby Elio gets a DNA sample, they make a clone of him, and send that clone back to Earth in order to replace him. Classic alien abduction storyline stuff. And actually, the clone's probably one of my favorite parts of the movie. He's quirky, he's fun, he's kind of a standard, I'm just a happy-go-lucky guy, not really caring about things, and he, you know, does some little moments. He chops off his own finger and then sticks it back on in the background. But it's nice. It's fine. With that, then Elio goes on to negotiate with this villain. It's just kind of like, what you're hearing of this plot line, it's just kind of simple. Like, there's no plot B, I guess, other than the clone having good times with the aunt. That's about it. But now it's just going to be a through line of this one political conflict, and it's nothing crazy. In fact, as Elio goes to see, I've forgotten his name, I just know the name of his son, Glordon. Lord Grygon, that's what it is, Grygon. There's a lot of classic alien cliche names. It's like, oh, come have my glorp. You know, it's a lot of glorp language. Anyway, Lord Grygon, in having this, like, villainous, you're gonna negotiate with me, big evil-looking person, kind of as well has a lot of unfortunate overlaps with another space movie made by Pixar, and not one you necessarily want to be remembered for, Pixar's Lightyear, and specifically Seeing Zurg. It is, in a lot of ways, the same idea, the same tone, but with not a friendly villain negotiation scene. You can just see a lot of the gluing pieces of multiple movies coming together. And this scene, you know, it's alright. They do something nice. The whole time they're doing like a shooting range kind of scenario as they talk. It adds a little bit of tension, and every time Grygon gets more angry, he shoots more things at once. Wow, pretty stunning cinematography, I'm sure you can imagine. But it is nice the final time, he just shoots a big barrage and hits a million things. He does actually hit real living creatures, but they also don't die, so they kept it very PG. It just makes them all bold. They were fuzzy before, I guess, sure. Anyway, it's from here Elio is thrown into a jail cell, and they do introduce a new idea. You see it actually earlier in the movie and the trailers as well, but I think it's worth complimenting on, because I haven't got a lot of compliments otherwise, and that is Elio gets like a communication badge that everyone understands English, of course, but also it comes with anti-gravity, which is nice, and he uses that to handle a lot of the physical mobility things in this movie, which is nice. It gives a character powers without actually giving them superpowers. It's, you know, it's fine. Beyond this, you then get the other half of the montage of trailers you can come to expect. We meet the son. He's a worm. They hang out. They go back to the original place. Grygon's like, oh, my son, you're a bargaining chip. Oh, you know, all this good stuff. And then they also go on a montage of friendship around the ship, because also the father doesn't want to come and immediately grab his son. He pauses for dramatic effect for some reason. So, okay, here's where we come to the real thing, right? There's meant to be a relationship between this kid and this worm. It happens while they're waiting for the father to come get him for some reason. Already strange. They go off around the ship a whole bunch, and the father eventually shows up later when they're done having their montage, I guess. But also, the reason the father doesn't come immediately is because of a quote he says. He goes on to say, "No, not straight away. My son is soft. Give him a little bit of time." As if to insinuate, because his son is not a warmongerer like himself, he's leaving him out in enemy territory in order to harden him up, and he knows that his son is soft. There's going to be some element of that to bring up later. Maybe. Put a pin in that, we'll come back to it later. While Elio and the worm also have a very quick montage of friendship, it's then here Immediately, we have that emotional scene on the bridge. Hey there, yes, you've made it to the halfway mark of this video. Come subscribe if you haven't already for more animated movie reviews. They happen all the time, all through the year, so there'll certainly be more in future. Alright, back to the second half. We have that emotional scene on the bridge. Now, this is a scene we've seen a couple times in the trailers, and I've been keeping an eye on it because I was thinking, this is the point. This is the bit, right? Pixar always has an incredible emotional scene, and it's always a gut punch, and there must be some secret from the trailers we're just not seeing. No. No, there isn't. That is the scene, that is pretty much the whole scene, and there is no basis for anything they say. Elio has just spent all this time being alone, finding aliens, and then being so welcomed, so demanded by everyone that's here, and now that he's finally found a friend, and also is adored by everyone around him, he sits down randomly on the bridge and says, I'm alone, nobody wants me. Even here, maybe nobody wants me. And he goes and has a little bit of a moment, and then the worm's like, well, I like you. And then that's kind of it. And it's like, where is this coming from? That's an okay talking point. It's an okay grounding for an emotional scene if you could base it off of some events that make it line up. Sure, I guess Elio's just had it in the back of his mind, and it's now that he's got friends, it's not going to necessarily go away. Depression can come in many forms if you really want to go in that direction. But he's just been adored by everybody. He's doing, apart from the main villain, who he's already actively worked out and solved that conflict with his bargaining chip thing, everyone adores him right now. So why is it now that he's sitting down and saying, I feel so alone? If it's a point that he feels alone while surrounded by people, you could make a point about that. It doesn't. It is just a generic emotional scene with none of the depth of the emotion, none of the grounding that sets up the emotion, unless it was already the Earth that this happened. Like, it's not connected to that. It kind of is. It's just like it's just a grudge he has. I don't know, man. I was really hoping there would be a secret in this movie that the trailers weren't showing, and then it's marketing's fault. But no, I think the marketing was doing the damn best it could, because there's just no substance here. There really, really isn't. The trailers as well love to have a big pop culture song choice in the middle of it, just to try and get the general audience into it, and unfortunately, that's reflective of the movie as well. Very early on, there's just a loud pop culture music choice shoved in at the start, and it's like, come on, man. I know WALL-E started with a real-life song, but at least it's like thematic and of its time and says something in universe. They do it a couple times in this movie. Admittedly, once when they press the radio on the car, classic, but still, like, it just feels like a generic movie running with the odds. It feels like a Pixar movie that doesn't have a threat. It doesn't have a rival, so it's just so untrying in pushing the mold because it doesn't feel threatened. It clearly is, because Pixar's making some changes after this point, but with Elio being an element of its time and from a few years back that's just rebranded and finally out now, yeah, this is kind of what Pixar does when they're okay, fine, and not worried, I guess. And it's interesting as well with these emotional scenes, because there's more room they could have done in other places. We could have really seen more about this worm son, Glordon, and how he doesn't want to be like his father, and there's a little bit of that. I need more. There's then another bit where they then go to the cloning machine gel again, and Elio sees his clone having a happier life than he did, with everyone around him enjoying his company. And again, that's great. Elio looks briefly sad, and then we move on. That looks like a real, solid, emotional core idea. You could have even gone extra further and say that Elio, after discovering the clone machine works on DNA, tries to find the hairs of his mum and dad somewhere just to clone them and bring them out. There's a lot of room for really strong emotional scenes, and there's none of it in the delivery or the setup or the just execution on any of it. And it's a real shame, because I think there's a couple other places they could have added a little secret extra hint of a layer, and it's just not in this movie. Anyway, now we go into spoiler territory, because you basically can only surmise this much from the trailer. Well, you can probably guess the end of the plot, but we'll get there. Anyway, now that we've got the clone thing set up, they then go on to clone the worm son instead. He's gonna take this place, become a warmonger for his father, and they can not have to worry about it ever again. Just like what Elio's currently doing at home. But what is very nice in this, I can't remember where exactly these two events happen in the timeline of the movie, but we'll run with it anyway. I'll mention them both here. What I really, really like with especially the clones is the aunt being someone who is not just a generic, like, oh, I lost my son and I don't know where he is, not useless parent, actively discovers and realizes that their clone is acting odd and finds out that they are a clone and coming to the conclusion that Elio has been abducted. That's really, really nice because it implies that the character does know their new nephew and, working on the dynamics of their relationship. That's really, really sweet. It happens, but they don't, it's this again. Anyway, following on that theme, Gligon also realizes that his son is far too chipper and agreeable now and discovers that his son is a clone and that the real one is still being abducted. Hence, he's very angry. And now the attack on the Communiverse begins. Sweet, brilliant, I like it. This is then the sad times. Elio is banished and kicked out and the whole Communiverse is under attack. But actually, here as well is where things really could have gone somewhere. See, on the side, there's this jellyfish character who's able to read thoughts, right? It's a classic, generic, alien thing. But they use this as a moment to read Elio's mind to discover where the real son is, and they find them at the docks later on. Cool. But in this moment as well, this alien is clearly more perturbed after reading Elio's thoughts, and the reason is because they then realize Elio's just a kid, he's not the leader of Earth, he's been lying to them all this whole time. I think this was a real missed opportunity, as you could have done more there. Imagine if, after reading his mind, they become even more softer and surprised. There is this revelation that gets them banished, but maybe in that moment as well, we learn a little bit more of the grieving side of Elio's memories, maybe even giving us a flashback to the accident with the parents. It could have been some reveal of some secret that Elio really doesn't want to address, not only keeping a secret from the aliens, but keeping a secret from himself. What if, on just another cliche, simple idea, what if it turns out that Elio was responsible for the incident that killed his parents? Or something. Maybe it's too dark for a Pixar movie, I don't know, it is only PG. But something to imply that there's a little bit more depth that explains why Elio is grieving so badly, why they're refusing to connect with other people for fear of causing damage like the people they were last most connected to. There's such a thing here. That is the spot for an emotional gut punch. A Pixar classic. Nothing. It's just generic. You lied to me! Get out, alien kid, in generic alien kid abduction movie. Instead, there is room for another emotional scene here. You'll never guess if this one delivers well too. Elio is sad on the coast after being returned, discovers their aunt with their clone. The clone goes away, and the aunt recognizes her real nephew as well. Realizing that they themselves were making a crop circle saying, "Bring Elio back." They have a heart-to-heart in the form of a hug, very few words, and that's it. Again, you can see that's meant to be something. I guess you're meant to read the subtext of, yeah, I knew it was you the whole time. But I think you could have still made that feel stronger than just a hug. And, it's just not enough. It's just you have to stretch to feel, you know what I mean? Against the likes of all the other Pixar emotional gut punches, no man, it's just not it. Anyway, from here, you then get the Flight to the Navigator ending that you can also imply from the trailer. They need to raid the military base to get a spaceship. It's the Worm Son that accidentally teleported to Earth, and that's why they're not going to find him up in the attack on the Communiverse. It's also here where the line, "You made a friend?" from the trailer appears, and they doctored that one too, because it's not the aunt that says it, it's the aunt and the clone that says it to Elio. That one at least I understand because it's a spoiler, and I guess out of context, hard to follow the clone. Even still, it's better in the movie than the trailer. The marketing just made everything as generic and boring as possible. They do have a fun sequence. Again, the clone is the best part of the movie, where he disintegrates into a soldier and scares him. It's a nice horror moment. They play around with horror in this quite nicely. Pixar love their side horrors. And then, what do you know? They get to the alien spaceship, they get in, and then they fly away to the final base. The Communiverse again. There's an element there of the Worm Son being frozen because his badge is broken. Because, yeah, that's the thing, it also controls temperature. I don't get why they didn't rip off the badge to make them normal temperature rather than accidentally, actively setting it on cold, but, sure, whatever. And this as well is meant to be another emotional scene whereby they're flying out to space and it takes community in order to make them dodge a bunch of space debris. They do this because a radio goes to the original bully at school, who now is not a bully. He wants to be friends with Elio because another bully went too far, I guess. Shaky. This not bully friend then goes on to know the conspiracy theorist scientist, who they have never shared a scene with before. Sure, Shaky. They then give guidance in order to dodge space debris as they do a few things. The aunt knows where to project and rearrange, that's her job. They then go out of range, and then after that, they start getting telecommunications via other humans speaking in other language accents. It's a miracle that they're all speaking English in such a short time frame to know what's going on and not their own native language, sure. It's meant to be that nice camaraderie moment, humanity coming together with this hurdle, but also, it's not that great. It's not as strong as it could be, because it's just voices coming out of a radio. I think if you at least saw each one on their own little radios across the globe, I could have been slightly better. It's just, I don't know, man. You just can't feel it that strong. I couldn't anyway. Anyway, they then get to the final area for the final conflict against the big villain. He sees his space worm son is frozen, and so, chucking away all of his honor, he decides to rip open his body armor suit, because it's a body armor suit, by the way, and that's the most dishonorable thing you can do or something, comes out of his suit, and then warms up and coddles his son, just like Glorgon's mum used to do. With that, the worm son wakes up, everyone's happy, the end. Literally. Okay, wait, hold on a minute. We had a few motivations at the beginning of this movie. Where are they? There's this warmongering villain out to take over the universe. He wants to combine with the communiverse to take over the universe. He also, remember this pin, we're bringing it back again, actively knows that his son is soft and not the warmongerer that he wants his son to be. The ending, the son wakes up and then confesses that he doesn't want to be a warmongerer. And the dad's like, yeah, I know my son. I love you anyway. And that's the ending? It's not very accurate, is it? He, at the beginning of the movie, already knew what his son was like and also wants to go to war. Now, he got his son back, doesn't want to go to war. Or maybe he does and we're not going to address it. You could even say it's an element of, oh, he briefly lost his son, so he wants anything to get it back. Cool. Show me that more. Tell me that more. I want to see him genuinely having like this internal moment of, oh man, this is more important to me than my war. We don't. It just kind of ends on a quick happy note. The communiverse wanted a new member out of these two candidates. Does it want them anymore? Because they don't get either and they don't talk about it. Elio decides to go back on Earth because he discovers he's not alone and gonna be with his aunt, which is, of course, the classic standard cliche ending you could probably have predicted from this movie. And then in a post-credits scene, he's with the not bully friend communicating with the aliens over radio. The plotline, pretty standard. The visuals, unfortunately, that generic Pixar bean look. Emotions in every regard not too strong or not really utilized. There's a couple of sci-fi references in there. I spotted particularly Alien and Star Wars. Cool. But they didn't really lean into the grieving that is at the core of this protagonist character. All the motivations from the start of the movie are missing. They occasionally do things in another alien language, which is nice. They have the translators and sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. And it's just like, yeah. There's a couple things that also confused me along the way that I was trying to work out what's the time period. They were talking about like a 70s space mission at the start. The house designs felt like a 1960s cul-de-sac, but then there's also iPhones, so I assume it's modern day, but it was kind of iffy there. And though there are things I like in certain aspects, by all regards, it's just a standard generic Pixar movie and easily makes this one of the most forgettable Pixar movies. It just doesn't have that oomph, you know? It's the relationship dynamic of Lilo and Stitch, but done worse. It's the opening of WALL-E, but done worse. It's kind of the Lightyear Zurg reveal, which that already wasn't good to start with, so what a great basis. And then it's just kind of every Disney orphan with a lot more grieving that's not really, you know, covered well enough. And at the end of the day, it's kind of just E.T., but in reverse. And making like a classic movie, but like 40 years too late, doesn't make it a modern classic. It just makes it not a groundbreaker in any regard. It's just a movie in the year. Looking at the marketing of Pixar's Elio, it was kind of confusing if it had any legs, if it had any oomph, and I thought if there's anything that could save it, there must be a secret. Having seen it, there are a couple of shots that look worse in the trailer than the full thing, because they didn't want to spoil that they had some cool-ish generic sci-fi ideas. And that's it. I think there's a reason that the marketing's not been too explosive, and Pixar's already talking about the future ones. This seems like a little bit of a lost cause of the project, already going through development hell, and then the final results just a little bit sanded down and soft in every regard. There's no good punch, there's no big hit, it's not a Pixar classic, it's a classic story done by Pixar. And for that, it certainly makes it the case, at least for me, that Pixar's Elio is definitely just forgettable. For now, though, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this review. Do tell me your thoughts on Elio if you've gotten around to seeing it yet. It's only day one and I'm on a British time zone, so I might be ahead of the crowd here. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and more, and I shall see you all in a little bit. Cheerio!